Welcome to our Regulation Mastery session. In this session, we will continue reading the CSSF Circular 22-806 from Part 2, Requirements, in the context of ICT outsourcing arrangements. Part 2, Requirements in the context of ICT outsourcing arrangements. 114. The purpose of this part is to define specific requirements applicable in the context of ICT outsourcing, cloud and non-cloud, and that shall be complied with in addition to the general requirements laid out in Part 1 of this circular. The following provisions contribute to the sound and prudent management, the proper organization of the in-scope entities, and the preservation of information security of the in-scope entities. 115. The requirements set out in the present Part 2 do not apply to business process outsourcing, i.e. outsourcing arrangements, that are not pure ICT outsourcing, even if the outsourcing arrangements themselves rely on ICT outsourcing, i.e. underlying ICT systems form part of this business process outsourcing. 116. When ICT outsourcing, or at least one of the subcontractors in case of sub-outsourcing, relies on a cloud computing infrastructure, as defined in Point 1, the in-scope entities shall comply with the requirements of Points 114 to 119, as relevant, and Chapter 2 of Part 2 only. In case of ICT outsourcing arrangements other than those relying on cloud computing infrastructure, as defined in Point 1, in-scope entities shall comply with the requirements of Points 114 to 119, as relevant, and Chapter 1 of Part 2 only. 117. In case of ICT sub-outsourcing, the requirements of this part, as applicable in line with Point 116, shall apply to the whole outsourcing chain. 118. In accordance with the principle of proportionality, an in-scope entity may, if evidenced by comprehensive and robust conclusions from the assessment of the criticality of functions and the risk analysis, justify not applying the requirements set out in the following points when the ICT outsourcing is not critical or important and is unlikely to become critical or important. A. Point 103. Continuity in case of resolution or reorganization, or another procedure, and b. Point 112, b. Transfer of services where the continuity of the provision of services is threatened. 119. In-scope entities are reminded that for all ICT outsourcing arrangements, they shall a. Ensure that access to data and systems fulfill the principles of need to know, and least privilege, i.e. access, is only granted to persons whose functions so require, with a specific purpose, and their privileges shall be limited to the strict necessary minimum to exercise their functions, and b. Ensure that access to data subject to professional secrecy are granted in compliance with Article 41, 2a, LFS, or Article 30, 2a, LPS where applicable. Chapter 1. ICT outsourcing arrangements other than those relying on a cloud computing infrastructure. 120. The requirements of Points 59 and 60 apply to ICT outsourcing arrangements concerned by the present chapter. Subchapter 1.1 Requirements applicable to in-scope entities other than support PFS, authorized under Articles 29-3, 29-5, and 29-6 LFS, and their branches abroad. 121. Without prejudice to Point 119 above, in-scope entities may outsource their ICT system management or operations services. A. In Luxembourg, solely to a credit institution, or a financial professional holding a support PFS authorization in accordance with Article 29-3 LFS, IT systems and communication networks operators of the financial sector, OCIRC, the unique exception allowed under Article 1-1-2 C. LFS, is the recourse to an entity of the group to which the in-scope entity belongs, and which exclusively deals with group transactions. B. Abroad, to any ICT service provider, including an entity of the group to which the in-scope entity belongs. 122. In-scope entities may outsource ICT services other than ICT system management or operations services to any ICT service provider, including a group entity providing ICT services, or support PFS. Such outsourcing arrangements must be set up in compliance with the requirements of point 119 above. In particular, if the service provider is not allowed to access to data subject to professional secrecy in compliance with Article 41, 2a, LFS, or Article 30, 2a, LPS where applicable, the service provider may have access to this data only if it is overseen, throughout its mission, by a person of the in-scope entity in charge of ICT.